Hi, my name is Brennan Sexton. I am a graduate student at Binghamton University studying invertebrate paleontology.
And I am Erin Potter. I'm a PhD student in Earth Sciences and a lecturer in geography. And this video is going to be on New York fossils. This is geared towards elementary educators. So, whether you're in the school system or you are a homeschool parent who wants to add a little bit of geology and you are in New York, this is the video for you. So, this is for those of you who may or may not know anything about New York fossils. So, we will go over some of the basic geology of New York State and kind of the timeline of the rocks that we find at the surface. And we'll also go through some of the common fossils that you can find when you're out and about with your kiddos. As an educator, you probably have the general knowledge of working with children. So I'm just going to give some specific tips for handling geology material with children. Geology really is a great opportunity for hands on activities, and that does help with learning, especially at this age. You can acquire fossils from local museums for your classroom, but you can likely find them in your own backyard. I'll go through some popular examples of what you can find, and you can use other learning tools as well. Paleopets are these really cute stuffies of some of these past organisms that shows some of the features, and they're really cute for kids. And pictures are also a good way to show some of the features and the habitats of the past. There are many geology related lessons that can go along with fossil hunting, and kids will love it all. Be sure to include things like magnifying glasses, maybe notepads for drawing or note taking for older children. And I'll also go through some field trip ideas in this video. Museums are a great way to learn about geology, and if it's in your budget, a trip to one of these could help students learn more about New York fossils. Some examples are the Museum of Earth in Ithaca, the New York State Museum in Albany, and in New York City, the American Museum of Natural History. These are some of the bigger museums that have great fossil collections, but there are a lot of others in New York State, so be sure to look up some in your area. A lot of times, colleges also have private collections as part of their earth science program, so be sure to look into that as a resource as well. They do sometimes let students come in and take a look at their collections. And you can always work with museum staff or the staff at the college for programming ideas. If you don't want to stray too far, you can likely find fossils in your own town. Just head to anywhere with a bunch of native rocks. Always be aware of permissions, weather consideration, proper clothing and footwear for the kiddos, and be sure to check on permissions for collecting as well. Some places, like state parks, don't allow the collecting of fossils and rocks. Stream beds are amazing spots for kids to explore. It becomes like a treasure hunt. Hiking trails often have rock piles, but stream beds are like gold. You can almost always find something. There may be some quarries in your area that allow folks to come and look. Just be sure to check on permissions before venturing in and always be aware of any safety considerations there. Also, with the knowledge that you'll have from this video, you can collect and acquire fossils yourself and bring them into the classroom. It is fun to show the kids the actual fossil and tie it with other activities. Some examples are showing pictures of what these organisms looked like or having the kids draw it out. You can find a recipe for making fossils out of dough. You can do a fossil dig. The possibilities are endless. And there's a lot of sub themes that you could add on to these adaptations, past climates. You can have them make an infographic on what a fossil actually is. There are so many options, so many opportunities for learning. An additional tip I have is on the language you use with your kiddos. I, of course, don't want to overwhelm them or you with technical jargon. So sometimes we need to assess what we want them to know. I do think it is so cute to introduce big words and have them sounded out, and you'll be amazed at what terms stick with them through the years. It's up to you which words you want to introduce, but I suggest the name of the time period, which I'll describe here in a moment, and the names of the organisms they're going to be looking at. Everything else they can get in high school or college. So, what you're looking at here is the geologic timescale. This is where scientists have named different chunks of time, usually marked by extinction events and or some unique environmental change. And this goes back to the beginning of Earth. 4.6 billion years is at the bottom, and we have present time at the top. Another tip I have is how to deal with the concept of time. This may be entertaining for you, with the children often not being able to fully grasp the concept of deep time. I often say things like, "That's older than your papa," and the reactions are amazing. So feel free to have fun with it. And we're going to be looking at New York State, which is mostly in the Ordovician to the Devonian periods. So that's like 488 million years ago to about 350 million years ago. So, really, if you just say somewhere around 400 million years ago, they're going to just see that as a big number. So, you don't have to really get specific with time in this case. As I mentioned, most of New York has Ordovician to Devonian rock exposed at the surface. So, we'll find organisms fossilized from these time periods. So, what you're looking at here is a geologic map of New York State showing which period can be seen at the surface. So, you can take a minute to kind of locate where you are on this and what period the rock is that is exposed in your area. So, I will say that the Adirondacks and parts of the Hudson, east of the Hudson, are extremely old, and we don't have a whole lot that is preserved from that time frame. So, a lot of the focus of this video is going to be on the majority of the state in the Devonian, the Silurian, and the Ordovician. And I will say that New York City, Long Island, if anybody's located from there, you do have some younger rock and some different fossils that are found there. So, this video is only really going to cover the fossils that we typically find in a majority of the state. Now, before we get into the actual fossil identification and facts, I always like to have students imagine what the world was like back then. And it may be hard to imagine, but 400 million years ago, we would be using our snorkels. This area was covered by a shallow sea with reefs, and this picture here shows a typical Devonian period reef. So the critters that you see here have been preserved as the world changed many times to where we are today. So now let's look at some of the common groups of fossils found in New York, go over some fun facts to share with your students, and how you can identify them on a field trip or in the classroom.
So Erin had touched on this just a little bit earlier, but to understand the Devonian reefs, we first need to understand what formed them. So we still have sponges and corals like we do in our modern reefs, but they're just a little bit different than the kinds that exist today. So the first kind of coral that we have is known as a rugose coral. These are also known as horn corals due to sort of cornucopia shape. It looks like a bison horn, right? Some of them are colonial, but a lot of them are commonly found as single individuals like the one on the screen. They look sort of like a sea anemone with a shell. But by counting the growth rings of these rugose corals, like that of a tree, we can actually count the number of Devonian days. So we know back during the Devonian period, the Earth actually spun a lot faster, and there was about 400 days in a Devonian year. The next type of coral that we have are known as tabulate corals, and these guys are exclusively colonial, so we're only going to find them in groups. But the cups that hold these corals are very, very tiny compared to that of a rugose coral. Also, if you look at the inside of a tabulate coral inside this cup, it's going to be very smooth on the inside. But if you look inside of a rugose coral, they're going to have these sort of ridges that sort of all migrate towards the center. But despite looking like modern corals, they are completely unrelated, but they still had a very diverse set of growth patterns. So these are just a couple of the varieties of tabulate corals that we have here in New York. So we have halocites, which is known as a chain coral because it forms these will like interlocking. They look like chains, right? We have Alipora, which is a bud coral. These grow over basically everything. We find them very commonly in brachiopod shells on top of other corals. We have Phaphosites, which is a honeycomb coral. They form these huge, just dense mounds. And then Thanoptichia and Cladopora are both branching corals, which again, they look very, very similar to our modern corals, but again, weirdly enough, completely unrelated.
We can sometimes find a very similar looking organism called the bryozoan. So these do look a lot like coral, but they are different organisms and they have a very different structure. There is a variety of them, as you can see here, but this is something that you might find as well.
Okay, so this name is a little daunting, but this is called a stromatoporoid. There's a pronunciation guide up there for you in the top right. But these are layered sponges. They have these very distinct, yeah, like just layers on them. So actually, the sponge is only really in that top layer that you see. Everything else is dead below that. But you can kind of think of these guys as the pot to the plant. So it's the stromatoporoid to the coral, right? These are important, very, very important to Devonian reef ecosystems. So other organisms will grow on top of and even inside of these stromatoporoids. These guys are what starts a reef off in a particular area, but they can get large, some of them up to 100 feet wide. But they are just some of the most incredible looking things I've ever seen in my life. So this is actually my favorite fun fact to talk about when about the Devonian reefs. So our modern coral reefs have around 110,000 square miles of reef tract, right? And with that, 25% of all marine organisms have at least some stage of their life cycle in the coral reef, right? So imagine this. Devonian reefs cover over 5 million square miles. That is absurd. That is crazy. I don't even begin to know how to quantify what number of organisms would rely on reefs like that. It's hard to. But there were warm temperatures and large shallow seas everywhere, which allowed for widespread lateral reefs. It's crazy to think about. It's wonderful. So brachiopods are actually my favorite group of fossil organisms. So there's a quote by a paleontologist by the name of Douglas Irwin, and he says there must be some limit to the number of ways that you can stick two shells together and pump water through it. But if so, brachiopods have yet to find it. That is my favorite thing about them. It's such a simple design, but there's so much diversity that still comes out of them anyways. So there are these really small shells that resemble clams, but they're actually wholly unrelated. It's sort of in the same way that a dolphin looks like a shark because they both feed on fast moving fish in open water, right? Clams and brachiopods just happen to live on the seafloor and pump water through their shells, so they evolved to look similar. But these are, fortunately for me at least, these are some of the most common fossils you can find here in New York. You can go just about to any Devonian outcrop and find a brachiopod. Also, the Devonian is the golden age of the brachiopods. This is where they have their most abundance and their most diversity. They're also beautiful on the inside and out. So some brachiopods, like this butterfly shell in the top left-hand corner of the images, if you crack them open, they have what's sort of like, I can best describe it as a mineralized slinky on the inside. That's their lungs. They wrap their lungs around this spiral coil. It helps them filter feed. And I just my favorite thing about them is just because brachiopods are beautiful on both the outside and the inside. It's so wonderful to me.
As Brandon mentioned, these are very, very common, and especially in the Devonian rocks, we just have so many of them and such a wide variety. So if you pick up something that kind of looks like this, looks like a shell, it's most likely going to be a brachiopod. But we're going to go over what makes these different from our bivalves.
Okay, so I talked about that brachiopods are different than bivalves or clams. Like, so how do you tell the difference, right? And I just need you to focus on two things. It's that line of symmetry, right? And where it runs through the shell, right? So for up top, for a clam, right? It's going to run in between the shell, right? So each half, each valve, as we call it, is going to be a mirror image of one another, right? But if you put that line of symmetry through the middle of the shell, it's not going to be symmetrical on each side. But if you do that for a brachipod, right through the middle of the shell, it's going to be symmetrical on both sides. But if you put it in between the shells, right, it's not going to run cleanly through the middle. There are exceptions to this rule, as there's always exceptions to paleontology. So this is a lovely segue into our seafloor mollusks, right? These are so I actually grew up in Florida. So a lot of these guys look very, very similar to the clams and the snails that I would find on the beach that I grew up on, right? So although they are very common today, they were much less common in the Devonian. It was actually the brachiopods that I had mentioned earlier that were the ones littering the beach. However, the strangest thing about these Devonian mollusks is that they look very, very similar to the mollusks that we have today. I mean, there are some weirdos in there as always, but for the most part, you can look at a Devonian mollusk and be like, huh, I've seen that before. So our modern oceans are ruled by the octopus and the squid, but the Devonian is a time before that. Instead, they're ruled by the ammonites and the nautiloids, which were very important ocean predators. So some nautiloids, like Gomphoceras, which I just think is so cute, were cone-shaped, and others, like Gyroceras, were more coiled, like the ammonites. So, despite looking similar to one another, they have these very different suture patterns. So, they're like a series of layers inside of the shell, right? And it creates a tiny series of air bubbles throughout the shell. This is what gives them their buoyancy. So, at the time when these guys first evolved, this was revolutionary, right? To have a swimming mollusk, this was revolutionary. But over time, the squids and the octopuses found other ways to stay afloat. That being said, ammonites are actually closer related to the squids and the octopus than they are to the nautiloids, despite the fact that they both have shells.
We do find plenty of other shelled organisms in the mollusk group. So you can have a cephalopod, and you can see it's kind of elongated, or you can have things that look more like snails. So we have quite a variety of mollusks within New York State. So if you're going to find something that looks kind of like a shell, it's either your brachiopod, check the symmetry, or it's going to be one of these mollusks.
So echinoderm means spiny skin. And weirdly enough, they're very, very close relatives to you. A really easy way to tell if you're looking at echinoderm is, for the most part, they're going to have five-fold symmetry, like that sea star up there, or that sea bud in the lower left-hand corner. But they're also going to have these really obvious plates on them, or at least echinoderms from this period of time. They're going to have really big and obvious plates. And there are still many common varieties that we see today, like sea stars and sea urchins. I have a sea star next to what I'm going to talk about next, which are sea lilies and sea buds. These are the most common echinoderms in the Devonian period. Their stems are what wash up on shore. So brachiopods litter the beaches. So do the stems of these sea lilies and these sea buds. It's really hard that I'm like condensing this because there's so much weirder and there's so many other growth forms, but there's only so much time in the world.
One of the most common ones that you're going to find are crinoids. You might not exactly find them like this unless you are sifting through, which might actually be a really good idea for kids to sift through. A lot of times you're going to find them like this. So you'll find them just kind of pocked through the rock here, and this is the stem of these organisms that you're kind of looking down the stem. Fun fact, these are actually called fairy money in some places, so that's a cute little thing you can add in as you're looking for them. But these organisms are really cool. They're also called sea lilies, and we do see some of them alive today. So, if you are lucky enough to actually find a full fossil of it, you would see the feathery arms that it has towards the head there, and then it has this long stalk, and you can have that attached to the seafloor. We do have some organisms in this family that were kind of free floating, but what you typically see is that stem. So you'll either see it kind of laying across, where you could just actually like see it laid out, or you'll see it kind of looking down like I showed in the video here. So these are really cool also for looking at things like storm events. Sometimes you might see them kind of crisscross and just a whole bunch of them toppled over. So you could tell your students that there was one of these storms that went through in this shallow sea that just knocked a bunch of these over, and they were then preserved that way. So these are really cool for telling a story.
So the last common group of fossils are a fan favorite. These are trilobites. So the name trilobite means three lobes. So their shell is made out of calcite, like the brachiopods, or those corals that I mentioned earlier. But they also have a variety of other defenses against predators. So some of them, like that Phacops in the lower left-hand corner, can roll up into a ball. Other ones, like you can see that really obvious one, have these really long spines. So like all arthropods, they molt, they shed their skin. Which is what makes them so common. So sometimes you're not looking at the living trilobite. What you're looking at is a molt. It's just the skin that it left behind, which again is made out of a hard mineral called calcite. So this is why they're so abundant and so easy to find.
Something else that you might find is a trace fossil. These here are burrows from a worm like creature. So, trace fossils are not the organism itself. They are some kind of evidence of the organism. So, this could be burrows, it could be things like footprints. So, it's just something that the organism left behind, essentially, besides its own body. So, we can actually see these in a lot of places. Something else that's kind of related is we might actually have evidence of this ancient sea. So we might see ripples in the rock. So this is really cool to show kids as well. And I saved my favorite for last. This is a Eurypterid. This is also called a sea scorpion, and they are super cute, although some of them got really big. And I have a paleo pet of this one. So that's an opportunity that you could show this guy. So the Eurypterid, the sea scorpion, is actually the New York State fossil. And I will say that they are pretty hard to find when you're out and about with your students. So you might not expect to find this, but it is really cool to talk about and to show the students. And most of them probably don't know that we have a state fossil. So this one is super cool. Some of them did get really big. So I know that there are images out there that show just how big some of these sea scorpions got, taller than a human. But some are really cute and little, like these guys. So let's put all of this into practice. And I want to show you a real live example of some kids on a field trip with me in a stream bed. Did you find one already? Maybe not. Let's keep looking.
Nope. It looks like they.
Oh, good find. Yeah. Very cool. I see another one here that has a bunch of stuff in it. Those little guys here. Those are teeny tiny. They're called brachiopods right there. It looks like little shells, huh?
Kind of.
So all of this rock that you see is from a really long time ago. We used to be, like this area used to be an ocean. You want to know how long? You want to take a guess? How long ago?
100?
100 years ago?
Yeah.
How about 400 million years ago?
Oh my god.
This used to be a really shallow, not very deep, ocean. You found a fossil.
Dude.
Yeah, so these are animals called crinoids. Can you say crinoid?
Crinoid.
Crinoid, yeah. So these,
That's so big.
do you want to know what this is that you're looking at, that circle?
Yeah.
So these guys were they kind of looked like a plant. So if you see the stick here,
Yeah.
so they kind of have this like stem to them, and then their tops are kind of like feathery. But they were in the ocean. They're also called the sea lily. So this is looking down at the stem. Did you find another one? Oh, there's one with a bunch of little crinoids in it. You see that?
It's like 1, 2, 3.
All those little guys. Are you gonna be able to count all those?
No.
Oh, there's so many.
And some on the back.
These are called brachiopods.
Mm.
Do they kind of look like seashells that we have today?
Mm.
Do they?
Well, yeah.
So these are actually animals that are a little different from like clams and other shelled animals that we have. So these, 400 million years ago, there were so many of them.
Mm.
But now there's really not very many at all alive.
There's some on the back.
Yeah.
And on the side.
We want to thank you for watching, and we hope that this has been helpful for you. Now you can go out and have fun with fossils.